Perik Sheni Halacha Gimel, the Rambam says, also the Rosu Shuarum, you're not permitted to see the king when he's naked, Lokshu Mistaper, and not when he's taking a haircut, which is the same halacha with the Rebbe, that when you're Rabbi Muvok, the person that's learned the majority of your Torah from, is in the bathhouse, you're not permitted to be there. And when he's taking a haircut, you're not permitted to be present when he's taking a haircut. Because when you see him in that human context, he becomes humanized. And when he becomes humanized, you see him on a peer level. You have to see him with a level of aura and reverence that he's something which you're lesser than he is. And therefore, you have this special level of fear. Lokshu besamerchotz, lokshu mistapek, veno choletz. He does not give chalitza, meaning that if his brother passed away childless, the brother of the king, and now she's only permitted to remarry if she has the release, the chalitza. Chalitza entails that the widow has to spit in his presence. That means the act of spitting in a person's presence is a disrespect. Why is that? Because what the woman says, he refuses to perform levirate marriage. And the Torah says, V'yorka b'fonov, she spits in his presence. So if you're a commoner, you spit in his presence, that the Torah says, because he did not want to fulfill the mitzvah of perpetuating the name of the deceased, therefore, that's why she's receiving the release. But to spit in the presence of a king, it's the open level of disrespect. Shunemar v'yorka b'fonov zebizoyon. It says she spits in his presence, and this is the level of disgrace. Va'afilu rotzo, even if the king says it's okay, I'm willing to waive my honor, ain't shomlo, one doesn't listen. Shamelach shemoch la'kvodu ein kvodu mochu. A king is not permitted to waive his honor under any circumstance. Vol eino choletz in a miyabim. The only woman that you perform levirate marriage is the woman that you could be miyabim, which means the only woman who you perform chalitza to is the woman who you could be miyabim. And since the king is not miyabim, since you can't give chalitza, there's no yibum. Let's say he chooses to do levirate marriage. He's not permitted. V'chein mesu, what about if the king passes away? Although there's a mitzvah and the king passes away, he's childless. Does the surviving brother perform the mitzvah of yibum, levirate marriage to the widow of the king? Since the Torah does not permit, the wife of a king is not permitted to anyone other than the king himself, not even to another king. So since the law of yibum has no relevance, there's no chalitza, she remains in that state that she's not permitted to remarry. She's still considered the wife of the king, even post passing. I've mentioned the Gemara at the end of Makos. Yoshafat was the king of Judah, and he was a great tzaddik. And we have a principle of Melch Shemachol Kvod Ein Kvod Mochol. As you just said, the king is not permitted to waive his honor, but yet, whenever he would see a Talmud Chochem pass before him, he would descend from his throne, and he would embrace that Talmud Chochem and kiss him, embrace him, and say, Rebbe, Rebbe, Mori, Mori. My Rebbe and my teacher. And he would do this, display this in public. It was not in private. So the question is asked, but a king showing any human feelings to anyone, that's a breach in the aura. That he's showing himself as an ordinary human being. It's a mitzvah, but still, we say yibum. Spitting in his presence, that's the mitzvah. But you're not permitted. Over there, when he goes and he embraces the Talmud Chacham, what is he embracing? He's embracing a human being, but what is the basis for that embrace? It's the Torah itself, because this person is a representation of the Torah. If the king would want to kiss and save the Torah with every level of feeling, of course it's permitted. We find that David HaMelech, when the ark was returned from captivity, He danced at a level where it was nobody ever saw such level of enthusiasm and happiness. He was totally consumed. So Michal, the daughter of Shaul, was his wife, and she was watching from a window and saw how he danced. And she reprimanded him. And she says, when you danced in front of the world, it was like a person who has lost his mind. It's inappropriate to show such feeling. So he said to her, you don't understand. When I dance before that, I'm dancing before God. And when you're in the presence of Hashem, you're nothing. You're negated. There's no holdbacks. Therefore, that wasn't a compromise on his aura that he's compromising who he is in the eyes of the people. He's displaying how a person has to act in the presence of God. So when you kiss the Talmud Chacham and he embraces him, what's he kissing? It's no worse than kissing a Sefer Torah with tremendous amount of feeling. But outside of that, any level where it's seen not as it should be seen, factually, why does she spit in his presence? Because he did not fulfill the mitzvah. It's because he refused. Even though he's not permitted, because he's not permitted to perform levirate marriage, and he's not permitted to do chalitza, but still, what does the spitting represent? You don't want to do a mitzvah. And because it has that negative representation, therefore, it's inappropriate for the spit, therefore, he does not give chalitza. Meis lo mesen yos pesel palt torin shelo, or plei torin shelo. If somebody passes away one of his 7 relatives, he does not leave his palace. Even though, what would be leaving the palace? Mean to go to the cemetery, to escort the corpse. Does not, even though it's a mitzvah to contaminate himself. But again, following the way it's seen. We'll see in a moment. The first meal a person eats after the burial has to be from someone else. He does not eat of his own food. So they bring him food. So normally the ovil sits on the ground or a low bench, and people stand here the other way. The king sits on his throne, and everybody sits on the ground. To show, as the Gemara explains, that his loss is their loss. He sits on like a low stool. If he enters into the sanctuary, this we just had the Gemara by Yerom ben Nevot. If he's from the Davidic line, it's halachah Sinai was ordained to Moshe Sinai. Although there's a Torah violation to sit in the sanctuary in the location of the Shechina, of the divine presence, but if you're from the Davidic line, you're permitted to sit. If not, regardless who you are, you're not permitted to sit. The only one who's permitted to sit in the sanctuary is only Malchus David. Although, now the Torah tells us that when the Kohanim eat the meat of the more advanced levels of consecrated korbanos, such as the chatos. Chatos is classified as kochi kadoshim. It's the more advanced level of consecration. Osham. Osham is a guilt offering. Mincha. The only one who can eat the meal offering is only the Kohen. When he eats it, when you eat standing, it's not eating in an appropriate context. The Torah says lamoshka. Lamoshka means he has to eat it in an exalted context. You stand and eat at a counter, you don't eat that way. You sit down when you eat. It's more respectful. So since the Kohen is eating kochim, he's eating consecrated meat from the chatos, the osham, he sits. So why is he sitting? He's not sitting, and the Kohen is not from the progeny of David. But the Kohen, when he ate the meat in the Azorah, in the sanctuary, he did not stand. He ate it sitting. Because he was sitting not for himself. That's because when you eat kochim, when you consume consecrated sacrifice, whether it's meat or the meal offering, It has to be eaten appropriately. The appropriate posture is sitting. Okay? But David, if you're from Zarsham David, he wants to sit, he could sit. He could sit in the sanctuary. When he at Hakel, the king would read Mishnah Torah. He would sit, would not stand. And the king who read Mishnah Torah during Hakel in the 8th year after the sabbatical year, he was from the Davidic line. He was permitted to sit. If he was not permitted to sit. It's based on the pasuk. David, when he came into the sanctuary, it says Vayeshev Lefnei Hashem. He was permitted to sit before Hashem. Oh, he was permitted to sit in the sanctuary, the Azorah, when he ate kochim. Although a person not from the Davidic line is not permitted to sit in the sanctuary unless he's a king from the Davidic line, but the Kohanim, when they ate the kochim, the kadashim in the Azorah, in the sanctuary, whether it was chatos, osham, the sin offering, the guilt offering, or mincha, which could only be eaten by a kohen, they would sit. They would sit because that had to do with lemoshko. You have to eat it in a royal state. That's the way the kochim has to be consumed. So he's not sitting for himself. He's sitting because it would be a disrespect to eat it in a different context, in a different posture. The Torah says that if somebody dies, you're not permitted to lacerate your body, to express the grief, to grieve by tearing your flesh and wounding yourself. You're not permitted. It says, lo go to do. Lo yisru srita. Lo yisru to sorotis. We find that when Rabbi Lezer Godel, Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkins passed away, Rabbi Akiva, who was a student of his, was so devastated, he began pounding his chest to the point that blood started, he caused wounds. The blood started to run out of he wounded himself, he was bleeding. So Tosas asked the question, how is he permitted to do this? The Torah says you're not permitted to grieve over a person when he dies to the point that you actually wound yourself, like you're grieving, like you can't tolerate, you don't have a capacity to deal with the pain, the loss. So Tosas answers, where Reb Kiva pounded his chest to the point where he caused this wound, he wasn't grieving over the passing of Reb Lezer ben Hurkins. Reb Lezer ben Hurkins, before he passed away, said to Reb Akiva, the Torah that I was able to teach you, once I leave this world, that Torah will never be known to the world. You were the only one who had the capacity to receive that Torah. He was grieving over the Torah that was never meant to be revealed. He wasn't grieving over the person who's dying. He's grieving over the Torah that that level of Torah will never be presented again. It's the same idea. You're not permitted to be consumed with pain due to loss of a human being, of a mortal. He wasn't grieving over a mortal, the loss of a mortal. He was grieving over the Torah itself. Therefore, there's no violation of losis godedut. You're not permitted to wound yourself as a result of somebody's death. It's unrelated to that. Here he's sitting not for himself. He's sitting because anything less than that is a disrespect. To eat kochim, something of sacrificial nature, not in this position, would be a breach, a disrespect for the kochim, for the consecrated meat or the consecrated meal offering. Know this. You're not permitted to kiss a person in a Beis HaMedrash or in a Beis HaKnesses. It's a Ramon Shulchan Aruch. Why? Because since the Beis HaMedrash, the study hall where you study Torah, and the Beis HaKnesses is referred to as Migdash Ma'at, it's a semi-temple, because the Shekhinah is there to a certain degree, more than anywhere else. To demonstrate your emotion, your love to anybody but Hashem in that location is a disrespect. One doesn't demonstrate that feeling in that location. So to kiss so therefore one should not kiss his child. You're not permitted to kiss a child in a Beis HaMedrash or in a Beis HaKnesses. You should not. Because that feeling you only display that only to Hashem, to anybody else not. Of course, as Rabbi Shlomo says, there was one part of the Shulchan that was never printed. It's called Seichel. Right? Let's say a person has a little child and he's crying, and you have to kiss the child to calm the child that shouldn't cry. You're permitted to kiss the child. Because there you're not kissing the child to show your love for the child, because nothing other than kissing the child is going to calm the child, going to stop the child from crying. But let's say you just want to express your love to your child. That's what you're not permitted to do in the shul or in the Beis HaMedrash. Okay? So there was a story that this Rosh Hashiva hadn't seen his special student for a number of years, and he saw him, and he went and he embraced him and he kissed him. In the Beis HaMedrash, somebody said, how do you kiss him? The Rambam says you're not permitted to show that level of love in the Beis HaMedrash. So he said, this person is such a great Talmud Chacham, my student. When I kiss him, it's like kissing a Sefer Torah. We find that the Torah tells us that Moshe fled from Egypt. He hadn't seen Aaron in how many years? Over 60 years. Moshe had returned from Egypt. He was 80 years old. And Aaron, so Hashem says to Aaron, go out to the desert and you greet your brother. So the Torah tells us when Aaron met Moshe, he kissed him. Now, what isn't it obvious? Two people of this dimension, so close, don't you think he would kiss him? Of course he would kiss him. Does the Torah have to tell me that Moshe Rabbeinu ate breakfast and Aaron ate breakfast? It's obvious. Torah only gives us information, which is something we learned from. What do you learn? The Torah says, when Aaron saw Moshe kissed him, but what's the point of that? What's the takeaway? What lesson do we learn? So the Sefarno, in his commentary says, Kilu noshak sefer Torah. When the Torah says that Aaron kissed Moshe, it's like one kisses a sefer Torah. He was a holy object. That's what the Torah is pointing out. Not brotherly love, and he kissed him because of brotherly love. He hadn't seen him for so many years. Only to emphasize his point, Aaron, the great Aaron, who was the prophet, he saw his brother in the context of being holy no less than a sefer Torah. That's why he kissed him.